Welcome, everyone. You're at Office Hours, a program where we invite luminaries from the software world to share insights. These are one-on-one sessions with experts, and they've been great. I'm Lauren DeMeuse, partner and COO at Theory Ventures, and I'm delighted to introduce our discussion today. We'll chat in the fireside format for about 40 minutes, and please feel free to ask questions within the chat box, and we'll see if we can intersperse them along the way. So to begin, Tom Tunguz is the general partner at Theory Ventures, our $230 million fund focused on companies leveraging technical discontinuities into go-to-market advantages. Tom has worked with companies including Looker, Mother Duck, Monte Carlo, and Omni. We're also joined by Benn Stancil, former Field CTO at Thoughtspot. Ben had joined Thoughtspot in 2023 as a part of his acquisition of Mode, where he was co-founder and CTO. There, he held roles in Mode's data, product, marketing, and executive teams. And prior to Mode, Ben had worked on analytics teams at Microsoft and Yammer. So given his leadership at the evolving edge of data analytics over the past decade, Ben has incredible depth in this space and doesn't shy away from controversial topics in the arena, encouraging first principle thinking. So today we'll have a chance to probe these experiences more deeply. And with that, I'll hand it over to Tom.
Thanks so much, Lauren. Ben, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm really excited about this, and particularly the timing of it, with everything that's going on with Snowflake Summit, Databricks, the Tabular action. And maybe we can start there. We have two really big data vendors who are taking it out and over the future of business intelligence and data analysis. Any initial observations? Tabular acquisition, what does it mean?
It's an acqui-hire. The wild thing about this to me is it's like a $2 billion that if you read the Databricks announcement, it says absolutely nothing about what Tabular does. It says nothing about their customers or their product, not even if they have any customers. It is entirely we want to go hire the people that maintain this open source project so that we can be the people who control that open source project or demonstrate our commitment to the open source project being Iceberg, which is this kind of open data from. It's bizarre. That's bizarre to me. It's weird that I don't really know what the play there is other than the $2 billion stick in Snowflake's eye, given that, or one of the two, I don't know. Given that it was like the Snowflake was the big Iceberg people, they were the ones that were going to do it. Databricks was going to do their data lakehouse thing or whatever they called it, Delta Lake. These were different file formats or different sort of storage formats. I guess everybody that Iceberg was the better one. They decided on that, and Databricks' way to show they were going to do that one was go out and buy the people who created it, pay a whole bunch of money for it. I don't know. The whole kind of vibe of tech right now seems weird. There's all this stuff with AI going on. There's like people paying tons of money for things like Tabular. All the acquisitions are essentially acqui-hires. They're all like, all the AI acquisitions are basically acqui-hires, the same thing for AI talent. It seems like it's a whole lot of just players positioning chess pieces, but not real products coming out from them yet. I don't really have terribly strong reaction to what it means for data or whatever. It's more of like a sign of the times to me.
That's a good observation. So you think it's more people positioning themselves for the next 5 or 10 years, Databricks going public and being able to articulate a narrative, whether that's an AI narrative or a file format narrative or moving into BI.
It seems like they're 2 years ago, 3 years ago, they were planning to be the next Oracle. And I think that still Snowflake basically thinks that. Snowflake basically is a warehouse at its core with a bunch of products and stuff on top of that. They have this marketplace now, and one of the things they've announced at the Snowflake Summit stuff this year was a bunch of new apps inside of this marketplace that you can basically deploy inside of Snowflake without ever actually using the vendor directly. It starts to feel a little more Oracle-y, more like traditional stuff. They obviously have a bunch of AI things and AI agents and stuff that live inside of it, but it like fundamentally still feels like a database, just with a more expansive definition of what a database means, where now you have documents and things like that in it. Databricks seems more to be playing the straight up AI game. Like the Mosaic acquisition was also another $1 billion stick in Snowflake's eye at Snowflake Summit, which they announced on the Monday of Snowflake Summit last year.
History rhymes.
Yeah, I appreciate the pettiness. I like that. I'm here for that. If nothing else, I appreciate the pettiness. That seemed okay. We want to actually be an LLM provider. We want you to train custom LLMs on top of your enterprise data. I think that's ultimately where they want to be. Snowflake, I think, will try to do that, but they seem far behind. It seems like they're much more ahead in just the regular warehouse game. I don't know which one's better. Who knows? But it seems like that's what these acquisitions are about, is more like the positioning around that. And to the extent that they can sell those stories. There are products I'm sure that will come out of it. Mosaic is turned into a product inside of Databricks rather. But yeah, it's a lot of acquiring and gathering up all of the hot technologies and being able to say that we are the center of this ecosystem, it feels, where my rough guess is there's like an attempt to be the AWS of AI type of stuff where you want to be, okay, we are all these services to be able to do your cloud computing and stuff like that in AWS. And they're like, hey, you want to do AI services, Databricks is your place to go. Stuff like maybe playing that game, or they may just trying to be Oracle with more traditional data warehousing stuff. But it's also funny. Snowflake also paid like $1 billion or whatever, actually paid a lot less for their own acqui-hire of an AI company a couple years ago, and it turned into be their CEO. The whole thing is just a weird moment, I would say.
Both of them being compute clouds. You can look at the NVIDIA Snowflake agreement where Snowflake is basically reselling NVIDIA GPUs, and the Snowflake platform, the company wants applications to be built on top, and Snowflake credits consume. That's very natural. Like you said, it's like AWS. Maybe we can break that down. So I think there's two different uses of data. The first is business intelligence, and the second is AI. You've written a great blog post called BI's Third Form. Maybe you can talk to us a bit about what do you mean by BI's third form, and do any of these big chess pieces, these strategic moves, ultimately impact your view on the future of BI?
Yes, I think so. So the thing I think that changes BI broadly is actually what Snowflake is doing, not the AI stuff, or not with app stuff rather, but with kind of some of the documents and AI stuff. So basically, BI has traditionally been, and I think someone else wrote this somewhere about the tabular piece, BI has basically been like structured analysis on top of structured data. You have a bunch of records of sales and things like that. We're going to take that and we're going to make a dashboard of revenue by day or revenue by month or whatever. And that's a chart. And okay, we make decisions this way on some sort of analysis. I think that one of the things that's an interesting way to think about an LLM to me is it's basically a database of unstructured data with a natural language query. That's basically what ChatGPT is. It's a way to query the entire internet, and it will do functions for you. They don't really think of them that way. But if you say, summarize Moby Dick for me in 2 sentences, you're basically asking for select average Moby Dick from all of Moby Dick, where limit is 2 sentences. Like you can roughly make a SQL query. And I think there's a ton of value in that, where we have traditionally thought of structured data as being like sort of, this is the stuff where the real truth is, and unstructured data is all kind of hocus pocus soft stuff. But if you talk to most people who run businesses, it's the unstructured stuff where they actually believe there's a lot more insight. Every CEO will say, yeah, I have dashboards, but the real decisions come from talking to customers and stuff like that. The insight to noise ratio generally of unstructured conversations with customers is much higher than tracking digital footsteps. But the digital footsteps we have a way to actually get at. We have a way to make dashboards off of. We have a way to summarize them. We have a way to do it at scale. I think one of the things that potentially changes about BI is we end up in a place where you can query the unstructured stuff more, where you can say, great, we have support tickets, and we can actually look at them at scale, not just by structuring them by like sentiment analysis type of stuff, but you can just ask them questions directly of what were the main things people talked about last quarter on support chat. I think like that starts to really change to me what BI potentially looks like, where you don't just apply the analysis of sorts to structured data, and then unstructured data is like the realm of user research and this kind of like qualitative hand wavy bit. It's like you can almost apply some of the same rigor and scale to unstructured data. And I think tons and tons of information in unstructured data that we ignore because it's hard to get at. But once we have the ability to get at it, which a lot of these like LLMs and sort of the Snowflake document AI type of stuff let you do, I think the game changes a little bit in how we actually start thinking about understanding business.
That makes sense. And to just delving into that a little bit, structured analysis on structured data gives you numbers, right? An analysis of Moby Dick gives you text. Do you think BI, the future of BI, is the output numbers? Like do you see classification of those customer support tickets? Is it an or, is it an and with keyword clouds or summaries of kinds of ticket? Do you have a sense yet? Like, what is that? What does the output look like?
I don't think it is numbers. And I think people don't actually really want the numbers. Are useful. Okay. In the sort of reporting world, if you are giving revenue numbers, the SEC will not take pretty good quarter, as that's not going to work in your filing. But for the most part, when you're making decisions, pretty good quarter is like the thing that the number is, you're going to translate that in your head to that anyway, that the wiggles in the chart aren't what you're actually after. What you're after is like squinting for the trend line. And all the decisions that we make for the sake of operational stuff that isn't basically automated operational stuff, not which ads do I serve you? That's very much a quantitative problem. But BI for the sake of like, all right, we have to decide whether or not we ship feature A or feature B. Do we buy tabular or not? Like, ultimately, that's a lot of directional stuff. It's a lot of just describe things to me. I want to understand the problem. I want to understand like general patterns. I don't think actually numbers are like the mechanism that we currently use to get at that, because again, I think they're easy to summarize, and that's like the main, you can feel like, okay, I am getting an appropriate average because there's a way to average numbers. There's never been a way to average text. But if you have that same rough function on support tickets, I don't know that you need the numbers really. If I came to you and said, your average viewer of this show loves this and doesn't like that, you may ask for numbers on that because you don't really trust I think the instinct is, okay, prove it. Show me numbers so that you can say that's true. But then the numbers are just proof of the other statement. You don't actually care that much about the numbers. You care about the previous statement. But we haven't gotten to the point where I think like we trust the sort of summarization of unstructured stuff well enough to do it without the numbers. But I think if we get there, we don't actually need the numbers. Like, we're just trying to understand the way the world works. The way the world works is more descriptive to me than like a series of charts and dashboards. Charts and dashboards are helpful for the theory to get us to the theory, but the theory is ultimately what we want.
That's right. The narrative is super important, right? So there might be 3 different segments of viewers of this show, for example, and we want characterizations of each of those viewers. And the numbers are helpful in the sense of maybe it's a third or 60, 20, 10, whatever it is. But really what we're after in trying to understand how we improve the content here is that qualitative. That's the point that you're making.
Yeah. The numbers have always seemed like the only sort of real source of truth. But my way of thinking about the unstructured stuff is like user research is expensive. You have to have a person go talk to people and summarize stuff like that. But when you get the research report from a researcher that says, hey, I talked to 10 customers and here's the things they said, and you summarize it. That stuff really has an impact on how people make decisions. Basically, an LLM is something that's capable of doing that, but across every customer that you ever talk to and instantly. I think like we're a little skeptical of that, I think now, new, and we haven't really, it seems weird and off, but ultimately like the user research report of the narrative is that's the thing that really sticks in our head, not the 40 charts. The 40 charts are designed for us to construct that narrative.
Maybe we can jump then in the world of business intelligence for the last 7 years, let's call it, right? And garbage in, garbage out. We were chatting with a bunch of data leaders earlier this week, and we were wondering, what does data quality mean in a world of large language models? Is there such a thing? And because what they're really worried about is whether it's like AI systems on databases or AI systems on unstructured data, it's very difficult to get a sense of the data that's going in correct, and are people drawing the right conclusions? So there's a data quality problem there. And then there's also an inference problem, which is the large language models themselves are chaotic, non-deterministic. They hallucinate. So you have this kind of, I don't know if it's a multiplicative effect, maybe it's an additive effect of error that's coming into these systems. Is there a future for the world of data quality pushing into unstructured data?
I have the opposite reaction, which is my reaction is like, it seems like it makes data quality matter a lot less, frankly. Hallucinations are their own thing because it's like, all right, this is the thing inventing something. It goes off the rails a little bit and starts to just make stuff up. And I think that's a different problem, particularly a different problem in the business context. Again, you can't hallucinate stuff to the SEC. But putting that aside, just like data quality, like it's going to say, so imagine it will say the right thing if it had the right input. ChatGPT is pretty good. Hallucinations aside, like it sounds very realistic and reasonable and all that. The thing was trained on Reddit. My God, that's the lowest quality data you could possibly imagine. What in the world? And yet it still works. The kind of way I think of this is if you think of LLMs as essentially a researcher that just listens to everybody and then tells you the average, lower quality data stops mattering that much because it gets all sanded down in this kind of aggregate anyway, where if you're saying summarize Moby Dick and 99 times you're going to have the right summaries of Moby Dick that you're reading from Spark Notes or whatever, and then one random person on Reddit completely made up the plot of Moby Dick to be something different, ChatGPT is going to basically erase that weird outlier and say, it doesn't seem like it's that one. It's going to be these other. And in that way, if you think of LLMs as this sort of fudged average, which it is, data quality actually becomes less meaningful. If you're computing an actual mathematical average, one number off ruins it. You can say your sales number is wrong if one number out of 1,000 is wrong. If you have one summary of Moby Dick is wrong out of 1,000, or even 10 out of 1,000, or maybe even 100 out of 1,000 in your LLM, and you ask for the summary of Moby Dick, you're probably still going to get a pretty good answer. It seems like the data quality problem solves itself in that way. You lose some of the accuracy because kind of that's not what it's for. But in losing accuracy, you actually don't need as much accurate input. If like estimation out, then estimation in is fine. And not saying we should use LLMs for revenue reporting necessarily. I think that's a different thing. But in terms of, is this a system that we're going to try to ask questions and learn from? Then it can be fine. You may ask it like, what's the general sentiment of people at my company based on the last 30 days of Slack? Are people happier or are people like mad or whatever? There's going to be a bunch of noise in that, but that's okay. Fine. Like the problem would be if you have like really systemic issues where it's actually, we don't actually get any DMs. You're probably not going to have an accurate answer. It's not really like a data quality issue in the way that we traditionally think of it. That's more of just, you have like very incomplete picture. You're only like incomplete in, incomplete out, but like messy in, it comes out the wash out. And there's another, one of the talking too much here, but one of the things I think is really interesting. Are you familiar with Motif? Have you seen this company?
Yeah, the analytics company, the BI company.
They have essentially what they're trying to do is they've built like a transformer model on top of events, like web event, where it is not an LLM that you ask an English question and it goes off and writes a SQL query against a bunch of web events. It's basically like tokenizing web events so that you can say, okay, given these 5 sort of web events, predict what's coming next. Very much in the same way, autocomplete for web events instead of autocomplete for text, like an LLM traditionally. That's a way to do analysis with an LLM. It's not really an LLM. It's more of just a transformer technology thing. But it also has the same property where it doesn't actually matter if some of that data is messy. It doesn't actually matter if some of those events get dropped. It doesn't matter if you have Facebook scale of events or even just like big Shopify store scale of events. So you miss some, so some things get messed up or whatever. Ultimately, what you're trying to ask is, given these other things that have happened of this customer, they visited this page and put something in their cart, what's their propensity to buy? That's okay if some of that data is messy. Yeah, it's better if it's perfectly clean, but it's okay because it's just going to do the same sort of like text autocomplete, except it's going to be event autocomplete. And it seems like the rush to say we need really high quality data for this stuff is a little bit self-serving around a lot of companies that are like, let me tell you how my company is actually super important in a AI powered world. And I don't actually know that I believe that.
What you're basically describing is what I think Nassim Taleb, who wrote The Black Swan and Anti-Fragile, would want for a BI system. It's anti-fragile BI system. The more data that you put in, even if it's of mediocre quality, the system actually continues to average over the text. And as a result of that, produces a pretty good result.
Yeah. And I don't think it works for your revenue reporting, but in terms of actually understanding your business and asking it questions and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. I think it's almost like stuff more stuff in. And it probably gets better. This is basically what the major LLMs are, is they're just like, let's just stuff more training data into this thing. And it kind of get better. Now, obviously that's more complicated than that in a lot of ways, but not that much more complicated.
That's the reason why they work. It's just data volumes, right? It doesn't even matter what the data is. Let's just keep pumping more data, more compute. And then at some point, the average is actually pretty good. Let's keep moving down the data stacks. How do you think the world of ETL changes with large language models? A lot of these connectors tend to be pretty brittle. You could imagine data formats actually ultimately end up changing because somebody commits a new column to an ETL connector. Is there a role there for building resilient data pipelines and next generation Airflow that are powered by and damped by some of these technologies? Or because it's so quantitative and the output of the structured analysis needs to be right to go to the SEC, you probably want a deterministic system within the world of ETL?
Think you'd want more of a deterministic system there. My guess is for ETL stuff, one is there probably becomes a lot more interest in ingesting things that we haven't traditionally wanted to ingest because we now have a use for it. I want to ingest every Slack message. I want to ingest the body of every email, putting aside various compliance and privacy issues with that. Companies own it anyway, so I'm sure they will be happy to do it. Those things become probably much more interesting data sources than they have previously. Whereas before, I want every Google Doc in my Snowflake or my Databricks or whatever, or BigQuery. doesn't seem like it's like, what am I going to do with that? I don't know. I guess I'll search it. I'll just search it in Google Drive. There's no reason to do that, but now suddenly there's very much a reason to do it. And so I would guess that there would be a lot more interest in collecting data sources that we haven't traditionally collected because we have something to do with them now. But it doesn't seem like you actually do you ask an LLM to go do it? Seems like that's just going to be an engineering infrastructure problem that somebody goes out and Fivetran builds a connector to Google Docs or whatever. I would guess that, yeah, maybe LLMs or coding assistants help you build that a little faster in the same way they would help you build anything faster. I don't know how it would necessarily directly change process there. I don't know. That one seems a little bit harder to connect where the value is to use this thing.
That makes sense. Okay, so let's assume that the world evolves the way that you say, and I agree with your view, which is unstructured data is coming in, structured data is coming in, it's going into a database, it's then going into a BI tool that has structured and unstructured analysis. How does the role of the BI analyst change? And then how does like the consumption of this data change? Do you have more democratization and access to data? Is it centralized within data teams? Interpretation becomes more difficult?
Like my kind of guess is that as a data person, as an analyst, your life gets a little bit less important. Like the job doesn't matter as much, in part because of this like research thing. So if you imagine a CEO can ask their analyst team for numbers or their sort of automatic research team for hypotheses about something, what is our customers talking about on support tickets or whatever, I suspect that they go to that research team more often. They're asking that customer-facing people already, and they're getting these rough approximations that are game of telephone, 4 levels up an org chart from people who are on the phone with customers to their managers, to the CRO, to the CEO, and trying to summarize it that way. If they had a way to basically ask that question directly at the source, I suspect they'd ask a lot of those questions. And I suspect they'd ask a lot fewer questions of, show me this number, when they're really trying to understand that first thing. It doesn't mean there aren't questions that are strictly numbers. Like you're going to ask, okay, where is retention high? Where is it low? And that's not a thing like a researcher will know. It's a thing that the traditional BI stuff will know. Like, do you now need a whole bunch of people who are really talented in analytical skill and interpretation? The right analogy there to me is Google, where like, do we need assistants to help us understand things when we go Googling? No, we all just got good at it. We learned a bunch of technical skill to get good at it. You do it a bunch and you learn your way around. And people get very good at probably finding mostly true things on Google or figuring out answers to hard questions on Google. That to some degree may be like analytical ability, but in a lot of it, just, I don't know, you understand how it works. It's like driving a car. There's like a feel for the sensitivity of it. And I think a lot of things will end up happening that way. It does seem, if you think of the analytics function as one to aid in decision-making, having a rough Google approximation where you can ask questions and get decent answers about your business makes the need for that aid in decision-making a lot less.
Yeah, I can see that. We were debating this earlier this week. One of the things that came up was just context, right? Let's say you're operating a social network and there's the notion of a user. Right? There's a user, there's an active user, there's a resurrected user. There are all sorts of users. And so there's a question of, if I ask how many users logged in last month, the system needs to be able to know. And then the analyst needs a sense of context. And so some of the data leaders we were speaking to are a little bit afraid of these tools because it just makes it easier to draw the wrong conclusion. Because if the machine doesn't have that context and the analyst doesn't have that context, you might just, monthly active users may be up, resurrected users may be down, total users may be down, and you may draw the wrong conclusion. That overall group is up.
Yeah. And then I think that's where part of me, partly I think that's true. Partly I think that is true. Part of me is that just a vestige of the way that BI currently works, where every BI tool has this proliferation of dashboards and numbers and like kind of terms, and you'll see one word users means one thing one place and users means something else somewhere else. And it's hard to get at specific, or there's a whole bunch of specifics in it. And so you need to understand the specifics to know what you're looking at. But when people talk about it, like when the CEO asks questions, they don't express the same level of specificity in their question that you need to have to navigate the BI tools to be able to answer. Like, there is a translation there where the thing they are asking actually it's a relatively straightforward question. Yes, it has a whole bunch of details tied into it, But what we're trying to get at, it goes from like simple question that the CEO understands in relatively simple terms to actually there's a ton of complexity in that. I need to understand all these details, and back to trying to translate it to the simple thing for the CEO. And part of that is because the only way to describe the thing we want is in technical terms so that the current BI systems can understand it. It feels like you could start to bypass that and just not actually have to, and not because it goes simple question to weird complex stuff that a BI tool gets answered, but again, the same sort of like summary thing where you get your decision making isn't actually dependent on all of these details. The reason you need to know these details is because you have to specify how to make the chart. And the decision is oftentimes simpler. To me, I don't know. I think so much of what we do is like grounded in the way that we do it today. So much of the way that we think about like how we interact with data and understand businesses is grounded in the realities of the ways that we have to understand and interact today, which is by being very declarative about these sorts of things. But if you start to not have to do that, I don't know that you ever actually really see those details.
Makes sense. There's a very famous economist named Schiller who wrote this book called Narrative Economics. And the whole thesis of the book is that it's actually the narrative that drives the business, not the metrics. So if Databricks buys Tabular and now all of a sudden it's the leading AI company, irrespective of whether or not there's any revenue inside the Tabular business, people believe it. And so ultimately it becomes true. And so what I hear you saying is maybe the last 50 years of BI, we've been using numbers as a proxy for the underlying narrative.
Yeah. As the only way to say like the narrative is, there's no other way for us to claim a narrative is true other than numbers.
That's right. And now what we can do is we can say, let's just average over a whole bunch of text and actually that's good enough. And maybe we have a false level of precision with the numbers. We just need the narrative because it ultimately becomes that reality.
Yeah. Like the precision stops seeming like he actually needed as much. And I think we feel attached to the precision because we've gotten so used to assuming that's what we can't trust the narrative without seeing the precision underneath it. But again, I don't know it's a little bit of Google Mapsy type of thing where there was a period of time where you put in an address in Google Maps and you're like, okay, let me check it. And now it's not, just put it on there and blindly push follow it and we'll go. And once you develop enough confidence that this thing is probably leading you in the right place, you stop worrying about the details. And I think could get to a point where like similar with Google, where you ask it questions, you figure out the answers, you move on. You don't really need to do much beyond that. I think a lot of decision-making actually would be better off that way, where instead of contemplating all of these particular details and stuff like that, is let's make a decision, move on. And if it's on roughly approximately the right stuff, that's probably good enough.
You don't want to spend another 6 hours debating p-value statistical significance?
We can always, why not? I got to keep myself employable somehow. So actually, stuff is very important.
Yeah, Ben, thank you very much. Just to summarize, we talked about the future of BI. We talked about what happens with these databases, PL. At a high level, the things I learned, fascinating conversation. Is LLMs, in your view, are really great averages of large amounts of unstructured data. And that has the potential for really transforming the way that we do analytics. And maybe the precision, false or not, of the numbers that we use to understand our businesses might be supplanted by the averages of large language models over big corpora of data.
Yeah, we're not that great at interpreting the numbers. Numbers are hard to interpret. To your point about arguing about p-values, there's a part in which we can look at charts and then we have to figure out what they mean. And we're actually not that great at that. And so I don't know that we feel like we maybe are, but I don't know that we've actually proven to be so great at that.
You've given us a lot to think about. We're really grateful for the time. Thanks for the perspective, Ben.
Yeah, thanks for having me.